Welcome back, and kudos to you for your bravery in getting this far in the course. Shadow work might sound mysterious or intimidating, but at its heart, it is a practical, accessible process of self-discovery and integration. While it requires courage to face disowned aspects of yourself, effective shadow work balances that courage with compassion, curiosity, and even playfulness. In our previous video, we explored what the shadow is and why it matters so profoundly for psychological health and authentic living. Today, we'll focus on practical approaches to shadow work, specific techniques for recognizing, engaging with, and ultimately integrating shadow material into a more complete sense of self. These methods aren't about uncovering something terrible about yourself, but about reclaiming the energy, authenticity, and wholeness that become available when previously rejected aspects are brought into consciousness. As we explore these techniques, remember that shadow work is not about perfection, but about completeness, embracing the full spectrum of your humanity. The first step in shadow work is simply recognizing your shadow material. Without awareness, the shadow continues operating unconsciously, influencing your perceptions, emotions, and behaviors in ways that often create suffering for yourself and others. How can you recognize what, by definition, you've been trained not to see in yourself? Here are several reliable approaches. Notice your emotional triggers. When someone else's behavior provokes a strong, seemingly disproportionate emotional reaction, particularly moral outrage, contempt, or intense irritation, it often signals shadow material. Ask yourself, what quality in this person am I reacting to so strongly? Is it possible that I possess this quality, but have difficulty acknowledging it? Pay attention to what you consistently criticize in others. The traits that reliably trigger your judgment often reflect disowned aspects of yourself. This doesn't mean your observations are incorrect. The other person may indeed possess these qualities, but your emotional intensity around them likely signals shadow material. Identifying your allergies, those behaviors or traits in others that seem to get under your skin in a particular way, the person who talks too much, takes up too much space, seems too needy, appears too confident. These irritations often point to your shadow. Notice positive projections as well. Qualities you idealize or envy in others, their creativity, confidence, sensuality, or authenticity might represent positive aspects of your shadow, potentials you've disowned or failed to develop in yourself. Create a shadow inventory by exploring questions like, what qualities were discouraged in your family of origin? What do you find most difficult to acknowledge in yourself? What do you most judge in others? What do people close to you say they see in you that you don't see? What parts of yourself do you hide from others? These explorations begin building a map of your shadow territory, creating awareness that makes further integration work possible. Our relationships provide perhaps the most powerful mirrors for shadow material. The people in our lives, particularly those with whom we have conflict or intense emotional responses, reflect aspects of ourselves that we may not be able to see directly. Jung observed that much of what we perceive as chemistry with others, whether positive or negative, involves shadow projection. we are drawn to or repelled by people who embody qualities we've rejected or failed to develop in ourselves. To use relationships as shadow mirrors, notice recurring patterns in your relationships. Do you repeatedly encounter the same difficulties with different people? Do you find yourself consistently attracted to certain personalities that later become problematic? These patterns often reveal shadow dynamics at work. When triggered by someone, ask reflective questions. What quality in this person am I truly reacting to? Have I ever expressed or embodied this quality? How might this quality actually be serving this person? In what situations might this quality be valuable? Practice the "it takes one to know one" principle. When you find yourself making a judgment like, "she's so controlling," "he's so self-centered," experiment with owning the projection. I can be controlling at times, or I have self-centered tendencies. Notice the resistance that arises and what it might be protecting. Use triggering relationships as opportunities for growth, rather than simply avoiding them or blaming the other person. While maintaining appropriate boundaries, recognize that your strong reactions often point toward your most important growth edges. In close relationships, consider creating agreements about supporting each other's shadow work. A partner, friend, or therapist who can compassionately reflect your blind spots provide invaluable assistance in the integration process. The goal in relationship shadow work isn't to eliminate all projections, which would be impossible, but to develop greater awareness of when projection is occurring and to gradually reclaim these projections as aspects of yourself. Dreams provide a direct channel to shadow material, often presenting disowned aspects of ourselves through specific figures, situations, or symbols. Jung considered dreams the natural language of the unconscious, offering messages from psychic dimensions that consciousness has overlooked or rejected. In dreams, shadow elements typically appear as figures of the same gender as the dreamer, who embody qualities opposite to the dreamer's conscious identity. These figures might be threatening, disgusting, fascinating, or simply foreign to your usual sense of self. For example, someone who consciously identifies as kind and accommodating might dream of an aggressive, boundary-setting figure. A person who prides themselves on rationality might dream of an emotional or mystical character. These dream figures represent aspects of the dreamer seeking acknowledgement and integration. To work with shadow content in dreams, keep a dream journal beside your bed to record dreams immediately upon waking, before the conscious mind begins editing or forgetting details. Note not just the dream content, but the emotions experienced during the dream. Identify potential shadow figures in your dreams. Ask yourself, which characters seem most unlike my conscious identity? Which figures evoke strong emotional reactions? What qualities do these figures embody that I find difficult to acknowledge in myself? Practice dialoguing with dream shadow figures through writing, imagination, or artistic expression. Engage with these figures as if they were distinct personalities. Ask them questions like, who are you? What do you want me to know? What role do you play in my life? What gifts do you bring? Look for recurring dream themes or figures. These repetitions often signal important shadow material seeking integration. The persistent appearance of certain characters or situations suggests that this content is particularly significant for your psychological development. Remember that dream shadow figures aren't literal representations of who you are, but symbolic expressions of disowned potentials. Integration doesn't mean becoming exactly like these figures, but incorporating their essential qualities in conscious, appropriate ways. Active imagination and creative expression provide powerful approaches to shadow work, offering languages beyond the rational mind to engage with unconscious material. These methods are particularly valuable because shadow content often resists purely analytical approaches. Active imagination, a method Jung developed for dialoguing with unconscious contents, creates a container for direct engagement with shadow aspects. To practice, step 1, begin in a relaxed meditative state where you can access feelings and images easily. Step 2, bring to mind a shadow aspect you'd like to explore, perhaps a quality you've recognized through triggers or dreams. Step 3, imagine this aspect as a figure or character with its own voice and perspective. Allow an image to form without forcing or controlling it. Step 4, initiate a dialogue, asking questions and allowing the figure to respond in its own voice. The key is permitting genuine autonomy in the responses rather than planning or scripting them. Step 5, record this dialogue through writing, audio recording, or artistic expression. Step 6, reflect on insights gained and consider how the shadow aspect might be integrated into conscious life. Various creative approaches can access shadow material through different channels. Writing practices like unsent letters, dialogues, or free writing from the perspective of shadow aspects can bypass conscious defenses. Visual arts, drawing, painting, sculpture, or collage allow shadow expression through color, form, and symbol without requiring verbal articulation. Movement and dance provide somatic pathways to shadow integration, allowing the body to express what the mind might resist acknowledging. Role play and drama techniques permit experimentation with shadow energies in a contained context, trying on disowned aspects in safe, temporary ways. These creative approaches often reveal shadow content that remains inaccessible to purely cognitive methods, providing both insight and channels for integration. The body plays a crucial role in shadow work, often holding and expressing shadow material that the conscious mind rejects. Somatic approaches recognize the psychological content isn't just mental, but is embodied in physical patterns, tensions, and expressions. To engage in body-based shadow work, notice where and how you physically experience emotional triggers. Shadow activation often creates consistent somatic patterns, tension in specific areas, changes in breathing, shifts in posture, or characteristic sensations. These physical responses provide direct access to shadow material. Practice body scanning during triggered states. Where do you feel the emotion in your body? What qualities does the sensation have? Temperature, texture, weight, movement. Simply bringing awareness to these physical dimensions begins the integration process. Explore movement as shadow expression. How might your body express qualities you find difficult to acknowledge? What happens when you physically embody the opposite of your typical presentation? Moving with force if you're usually gentle, with fluidity if you're typically rigid. Use breath work to access shadow content. Our breathing patterns reflect and reinforce psychological states. Conscious breathing, particularly in areas of tension or constriction, can release shadow material held in the body. Consider structured somatic practices like yoga, tai chi, qigong, authentic movement, or body-centered psychotherapy, which provide containers for safely exploring the physical dimensions of shadow material. Remember that bodily sensations aren't just accompaniments to psychological states, but are integral aspects of those states. Working with the body doesn't bypass shadow material, but accesses it through a different door. Recognizing shadow material is just the beginning. The ultimate goal is integration, developing a conscious relationship with previously disowned aspects so they can contribute their energy and wisdom to your whole personality. Integration doesn't mean these qualities dominate your identity or that you express them indiscriminately. Rather, it means acknowledging them as part of yourself and finding appropriate channels for their expression. Practical approaches to shadow integration include creating constructive expression channels for shadow qualities. If you've recognized anger in your shadow, for instance, find appropriate ways to acknowledge and express it rather than either suppressing it entirely or letting it emerge destructively. Experimenting with controlled expression of shadow traits. This might involve designated times or contexts where you consciously explore these qualities, perhaps in therapy, creative work, or a trusted relationship. Developing a more nuanced vocabulary for shadow aspects. Rather than seeing these qualities in black and white terms, good, bad, acceptable, unacceptable, recognize their spectrum of potential expression. Anger can range from destructive rage to healthy boundary setting. Sexuality can manifest as either exploitation or sacred connection. Finding archetypes or models that embody positive expressions of your shadow qualities. These might come from mythology, literature, history, or your personal experience. Figures who express traits you're integrating in constructive, life-enhancing ways. Practicing self-compassion through this process. Shadow material often carries shame or judgment, making compassion essential for sustainable integration work. Remember that these disowned aspects developed as adaptations, not character flaws. Integration unfolds gradually in a rhythm unique to each individual. Some shadow material becomes accessible quickly, while other aspects may require years of patient exploration. Honor your own pace and process rather than forcing premature integration. Shadow integration isn't a destination, but an ongoing practice of self-discovery and psychological growth. As outer layers of shadow material become conscious, deeper layers often emerge. This isn't a sign of failure, but of successful initial integration, creating space for further exploration. The rewards of continued shadow work include increased energy and vitality as the psychological effort of repression diminishes, greater authenticity in self-expression and relationships, expanded creative capacity as previously unavailable aspects contribute their gifts, and more nuanced moral understanding as projections decrease. In our next module, we'll explore dreams and the unconscious more broadly, examining how these realms communicate important psychological material beyond the shadow. We'll look at dream interpretation methods, the significance of recurring dream themes, and practices for developing a more conscious relationship with your dream life. For now, I invite you to begin with simple shadow practice. Notice one quality you tend to judge in others this week. Each time this judgment arises, gently ask yourself, how might this quality also exist in me? What would change if I acknowledged this aspect of myself? Allow curiosity rather than judgment to guide this exploration. Remember that shadow work isn't about criticism, but about reclamation, recovering the energy, authenticity, and wholeness that becomes available when previously rejected aspects are brought into conscious relationship with your total personality. As Jung once said, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. Yet this effort yields one of life's greatest rewards, the freedom to be more fully yourself. Okay, bye for now and see you in the next video.